Excellent. Thank you for being here today, everyone. I am so excited to be a part of this session on distrust in rural Appalachia through a historical lens. Robyn Seamon is a certified transcultural nurse. She is passionate about seeing the health of people radically transformed in the rural Appalachian region, facilitating significant improvement in the high rates of health disparities in the rural Appalachian region is her heartfelt desire and calling. Robyn holds a Master's of Arts degree in Appalachian Studies, and we are so thrilled to have you, Robyn. I'm going to go ahead and pass the torch to you.
All right, thank you. I am so excited to be here, and I'm really glad to see all the people that have shown up for this presentation. I hope you get some nuggets and some inspiration that you can take away that will help you in interacting with people in this region. So I see a lot of people in the chat. I've lost my chat. Where did you go? But different words that come to mind when we think of Appalachia. There's plenty of words, and unfortunately stereotypes that come to mind when we think of Appalachia, but definitely rural, definitely home. You know, we definitely, I think those of us that are very fortunate to live here really love being able to live here. So let's see, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So does anybody in this group know what a transcultural nurse is? You can just raise your hands or do. I would suspect probably most of y'all don't, unless you have heard me talk before. But basically, a transcultural nurse is a nurse that has done extra training, and in the case of being certified, a certification exam. And really all it means is focusing on culture for groups of people and how culture affects healthcare and how just things we need to know about individual groups of people. That's just really all around culture. So that's what I'm all about. That's what I'm all about with Appalachia, is really trying to help people understand some of the cultural just things that are really good to know about the Appalachian region, especially the rural Appalachian region, which, saying that's kind of pretty much, Appalachia is almost completely rural, although there are a few, you know, a little bit larger cities like Asheville and Knoxville. But so this presentation today is really focusing on distrust in the region of people that are from government or healthcare, and really trying to help explain historically why that is. And then as we finish up, we'll talk about some strategies to help build trust, because there's really very valid reasons that people are distrustful of people that aren't from, you know, are not from the county they live in. I mean, it can vary from county to county. And of course, I think if I err with anything, it's generalizing too much. And I really want to say that up front, that even though I'm going to communicate all this stuff to y'all under the big broad umbrella of rural Appalachia, of course, everybody is not the same, does not have the same background, you know, and does not look at things the same. So I want you to really just keep that in mind, that I'm definitely just giving you a broad overview, and you know, we each have to really make an assessment of each individual person we're working with, but this could be a starting point. So we're going to do this by describing historical trauma and just kind of how it interacts with ACEs, describe some of the historical reasons for distrust in Appalachia, and discuss strategies for building trust in Appalachia. So at this point, I have a little poll for y'all.
Going great, Robyn. We've got about half the people responding so far. Got about 82% responded.
Great. Now, do I end the poll on my end, or?
I do. Want me to go ahead and do that?
Yeah, go ahead and do that. I think we have pretty much everybody's responded.
Excellent. I'm going to share results.
Okay.
Can you see them?
Mm-hmm. So it looks like we're fairly divided. About half of us have some understanding of historical trauma. Another good amount fully understands historical trauma. And then what's this, about maybe a little bit more than a third that don't know what historical trauma is. Okie doke. So let me close the poll. So what is historical trauma? That's really where we need to start with the definition of historical trauma. Historical trauma is a complex and collective trauma experienced over time and across generations by a group of people who share an identity, affiliation, or circumstance. The term was first used to describe children of Holocaust survivors, and it has since gone on and been used to describe just many different populations and groups of people around the world. And probably here, some of the groups that we're the most familiar with are African American and Native American and Hispanic. And it's really obvious that historical trauma has occurred in those groups, just with just history of slavery and the things that, were done to the Native Americans. I mean, there's not very much question about whether historical trauma occurred. So for historical trauma to be considered as applying to a group of people, there's three elements. First, there must be a trauma or wounding. Second, shared by a group of people, not just individuals, and it spans multiple generations. Contemporary members of the group can be very affected by the symptoms of historical trauma without having experienced the traumatizing event themselves. Now, as far as Appalachia goes, there really is no research that I can actually find where somebody has gone in and written a paper and said there was historical trauma in Appalachia. I'm not an expert on historical trauma, and I'm just kind of throwing this out there for y'all to consider and think about. And after we talk some more, really consider, is this really applicable to Appalachia? And I really think it would make a great research study to really get in and try to figure out, is there historical trauma in Appalachia, and how does that affect ACEs, healthcare, just everything else that goes on. So let's take a look at historical trauma, the effects of historical trauma. Populations and groups that have experienced historical trauma can tend to have diminished psychological issues and symptoms in later generations, 2 or 3 generations or more past when the traumatic event occurred. And so if you think about how does this affect ACEs, when people have high ACE levels and they already just have so much trauma from whatever caused the ACEs, but if they also are coming from a background of historical trauma, it's just adding that many more layers onto the things that they're trying to deal with. Second and third generations of groups that have experienced historical trauma can have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, disruption of family relationships, and parent and child relationships. And so, I don't know, this is kind of a blanket statement, but with ACEs, probably for the most part, there's some kind of disruption in family relationships, and many times with parents and children. And if you think about historical trauma, if the grandparent experienced it, and it's really affecting how they're interacting with their child when they're raising their child, and maybe they are not able to be fully present, even for just the reasons of historical trauma, never mind all the other things. And then that just keeps perpetuating with each generation. Groups that have experienced historical trauma tend to distrust the government and distrust authority figures. So with this in mind, I wanted to see if anybody in here would like to just comment or share an experience that you might have had or any thoughts that you might have had about, especially if you're not native to Watauga County or the Appalachian region, and your interactions with, as a caregiver of any sort to people, is there, and I don't know that I can see hands if y'all raise hands, but is there anybody that would like to share any kind of interaction there?
Sure, I'll share one.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm a speech pathologist, and many years ago, I had a child who had extreme orthodontic needs, extreme overjet. And so I had a piece of paper and I put it in an envelope and put a nice little happy note with it. And I said, take this home to your mom. And I didn't hear from mom. So I asked him, what happened to the note? He said, I threw it away. So why did you throw that note away? And he said, because Jesus will take care of my teeth. And I said, well, the Lord's performed many miracles, but to date, orthodontia is not one. And perhaps we could have you and your mom and I sit down and talk about it. And he absolutely would not contact his mother. And so I talked to the social worker about it, and she said, yeah, they're very deeply religious and they have no interest at all in any of these programs. So he did go without any kind of service, which would have been free of charge and with a lot of compassion.
Mm-hmm. So that's a really good example. And that's also a really good example of why my passion is really to help providers understand more about the culture in the region, because there's so many different things, so many interplays, but the strong conservative faith really plays a whole lot into people's thoughts about care, receiving care. There's just so much. And obviously today we're just talking about the history piece, and that's one piece of it. But yeah, thank you. Does anybody else like to share anything?
I'll share. I'm not from Watauga County, but I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia and married a native of Watauga County. And I see a lot of similarities in being proud, even though you might be poor. Hearing about the religious aspect, there's also we don't need help from anyone, even if we do need help from someone, aspect that I've experienced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think there's really so very much. And my goal is really that people understand these cultural things and the historical things. And there's really a lot of really, really good qualities and values that if we could use those qualities and values and really speak into them to bring about positive change and make changes in this region. It's a big task, a big want to, but I truly believe that we can make a difference. And I appreciate y'all for sharing. So at this point, I'm going to start talking about some of the historical reasons for distrust in Appalachia. And I apologize for these slides. These are, old original pictures, but they're kind of a little grainy. So the first thing that's really important to understand is that there's a strong oral or storytelling culture in the Appalachian region, as there is in some of the other groups that we're familiar with that have experienced historical trauma. Back maybe just one generation, not necessarily that long ago, when there weren't the tech devices, there weren't, maybe there was TV, and even before television, that the form of entertainment was to just sit around and tell stories and to get together and tell stories. So even though a lot of these historical things that I'm talking about may have happened 100 years ago or a little more, at late 1800s, early 1900s, you can believe they are passed down from generation to generation, and people are very aware of this stuff, and it's still very, very strong in a lot of people's minds. But so before the Civil War, pretty much most scholars and researchers pretty much agree that the Appalachian region was probably very similar to the rest of the rural parts of the country at that time, that it wasn't really behind, it was about the same. I'm reading a book on East Tennessee, and I was just reading this last night, excuse me, talking about, Knoxville was very progressive, and even Cades Cove, if y'all been over to Cades Cove in the Smoky Mountains, that it was actually progressive in the late 1800s, and people were looking to it for what was happening, or not late 1800s, but early 1800s. But the Civil War came, you had lots of people from other places, especially the other places primarily at that time would have been the North, but coming into the, coming through the whole Appalachian region, seeing just the vast amount of natural resources, the coal and the timber especially, and really, eyes gleaming with, oh, we know how we can make money. And so once the war was over, one, the region had just been decimated because of the war. And then got states that had there was so much, like, even in one family, one side could have fought on the Union side and one side on the Confederate side. And so some of the state legislatures didn't send as much money into their mountain communities to help rebuild, because they resented the fact that some of the people in the mountains were fighting on the Union side. So you had all that going on. You had people coming in. And the biggest issue with it is people would come, at that point in time, pretty much everybody living in the region, it was a very self-subsistence lifestyle of growing your own food, bartering for other things. Really not a lot of money changed hands. So people didn't understand monetary value. And they were very, very taken advantage of by people that came in and bought, hundreds of acres of land and paid a couple of dollars, just nothing. We didn't have coal mining here, but we had timbering. And the timbering was the same story. People came in, and there's stories where I can't even conceive of the size, but like the huge virgin oak trees and cherry trees that, I don't know, maybe they were 20 feet across, but they were huge. And they paid 50 cents for a tree. The other thing that happened is, if anybody's heard of broad form deeds, so while there was this race for the prize to get this land and valuable resources, broad form deeds were a way people came in, and I'm pretty sure this happened a whole lot in West Virginia, especially, but came in and said, we'll buy the minerals under your land. This is not going to hurt you. We'll pay you money for what's under your land, and it's not even going to affect you. But yet once the mineral rights were sold and they came in to get coal out, they had to tear everything up to get to the coal. So it did affect people. It destroyed the farmlands. It forced them off of their land. It was just really, really bad. There's stories about how mountaineers at the end of the 1800s would be very, very, very friendly, even as people are today, but very friendly. And they would see somebody come riding in on horseback and, usher them in and bring them in, because they were going to find out things about news and what was going on. And they would be just, very hospitable, bring them in and feed them dinner, let them spend the night. But, the person really was not up to any good, and basically came in and after dinner would sit around and go, oh, what about that ridge top over there? You're not going to do anything with that. How about I just take that off your hands? And so, taking advantage, and the broad form deeds, which, excuse me, I'm going to cough. I'm going to mute this and cough. So the picture of being the person on the front porch in a log cabin, seeing somebody ride up on horseback and just come on in, went to the early 1900s of the person standing on the front porch with their shotgun. If you come up on my property, I'm going to shoot you. And you can kind of understand a little bit of why that was the case. I've talked to people that talk about, even in Watauga, that grew up in Watauga, and even in the 50s, 60s, probably, that it was a totally different looking place than it is now. There were just places that it was bare of trees. The trees had all been stripped out. When that happened, there was no livestock. So there was no longer deer and squirrels, which is what people lived on and fed on. So, it's hard to imagine that the way it looks now. And I still have a hard time imagining it, but I know that, I believe her and know it was true. The timbering also caused a lot of the stories of flooding that you hear is because all this timber was cut down and not done in an ecologically responsible way. A lot of floods and fires. So that was kind of that part of it, that we could go on and on and on for a very long time, but of course we don't have time. And then the war on poverty. So how many of y'all, like when you see these images of a war on poverty, do you know what I'm talking about when I talk about the war on poverty in that time period? Yeah, I see some people shaking their heads. I don't even know if I vaguely remember. But so I think it was 1964, after Kennedy had first come into West Virginia, and it was part of the campaigning. And then when Lyndon Johnson became president, he had his war on poverty, that he was going to eradicate poverty everywhere. They chose purposefully to come in like to Eastern Kentucky, to the worst of the coal mining regions and the poverty, took pictures. Like, I would suggest to y'all sometime, just go Google war on poverty. There's so many pictures, and it's hard to use them because they're all like Getty images and things. But if you just look at the pictures, and so these pictures were in Time, Look, Life magazine. They were on the national news. Charles Kuralt did a Christmas in Appalachia black and white movie that was broadcast widely on CBS and all the networks. So you have a lot of, with all of that, stereotyping of the region didn't start then, but it was very compounded at that point in time. You also had many, many people that saw all of this and wanted to come in and help. They kind of looked at the Appalachian region like a third world country, and they wanted to come in and help and fix it. The problem is, I don't know, maybe community engagement, I'm sure, probably wasn't even talked about at that point in time. So people came in with just no regard for the people in the region, but came in with a very expert, we know what you need to do to fix things, missionary mentality, because they also looked at churches like all the little, if you've ridden around in the rural parts of the county, there's so many little small churches that were strong Christian faith churches, but people came in, and because they didn't look like an urban big city mainline denominational church, they decided that people needed religion and didn't have faith. And so there was a lot of missionizing that went on, a lot of very derogatory actions towards people about how they believed and what they believed. And so you take all of that, and it's like, now if you think about it, and somebody, no matter how well-meaning any of us all are, there's that resistance that's there because of this history. Now, whether we call this historical trauma or not, I don't know, but it seems pretty fitting. And there's other aspects of historical trauma, like intergenerational poverty and stigma, which was definitely going on with all of this. So what can we do about this? It's like, I think we can see these problems, we can talk about the problems, but what can we do about the problems? So I think the starting point is just even understanding that this stuff went on, and being just so aware of that, and that we're all just so much more aware and more careful about like avoiding the missionary mentality, avoiding being in a position of coming in and saying, we know what's best for you. We know how to fix your problems. And, you know, as far as, I don't know who all's attending the conference. A lot of people are attending this conference, I'm sure, are focused on ACEs, but I'm sure there's some people that are focused on some other things. But, you know, when we think about our ACEs work, and we've had some discussions in the committee I'm in on just awareness and how to reach out to the community. But it's like we have to take all of this into account and be really careful about how we interact, especially with the people that are out in the county, because there's just this, to me, extremely justified like wall that's there of what are they coming to do? What are they coming to say? How are they going to, you know? And so it's just so important to really focus on building trust. And, you know, I'm sure these are just really community engagement principles of just asking people that we want to help, what do they see as the problem? Because that was something with the war on poverty. There's lots of stories that when you start talking to people about this, there's lots of stories of people saying, we didn't know we were poor. We were fine until somebody came in and told us we were poor, until they put our picture all over the news for the whole country to see and said, look at these poor, sad, pitiful, poor people. And, you know, the people were like, well, we were happy. I mean, we didn't have anything, but we had family and we were happy. And so we just, you know, we really, really have to be careful to even, and I think when we apply that to ACEs, is to really try to build relationships first, but try to get people to verbalize what they even see as a problem and then what they see as the solution to the problem. To listen so much more than we talk, and to be empathetic and non-judgmental in our interactions, to really, you know, obviously we're all human and we have to really work at that when we get frustrated at people's response to things when we're trying to help. And it's hard, but I believe that if we really, really work on building trust, then we'll just have more hope of making a difference. So just carrying that a little bit further. So one cultural value of people in the region is egalitarianism. And when I first heard that term, I thought, what are they talking about? But I mean, basically now I just think about the word as equal, and it's egalitarianism versus hierarchical. People in this region, they want to build relationships with people. They want to be treated as equal, and any like sense of the person coming to them is a know-it-all, or you know, or thinks they are an expert, and they could very well be an expert on the subject. But if that is communicated to the person you're trying to help, it's just, you know, it's not going to work. I don't know if any of y'all have heard, if you're from around here, you've heard the sayings, just don't get above your raisin, and putting on airs, that are just, you know, ways of just saying, don't be too big for your britches. Or, you know, people will talk about, oh, their kids went off to college and they came back and they were getting above their raisin. And, you know, because the kids might come back and start talking to their parents in a different kind of way. So, you know, just being careful to use common words for explaining things, and not the high level jargon that we use in whatever discipline we're in. You know, we really need to be careful to not use those words, because even using those words can come across to the other person as, well, they think they're better than I am. And then you've just got that wall there. And then steps to build trust is keeping that in mind. Excuse me, let me drink a. Keeping that in mind, what I was just saying, as far as relationships are very important. There's stories, that get people, like when they were just family doctors generations ago, and people were used to having the same doctor took care of their grandparents, then took care of them, then they had kids, and so multiple generations saw the same doctor. And now we've got this whole system, now we've gone to hospitalists, and you see a different doctor when you go to the hospital versus who you might go in and see. But even like in the doctor-patient relationship, in years past, there was much more of that common ground, or commonly seeing each other out at the general store and just being very more on a level than our typical hierarchical medical system, where for whatever reason, and I'm not saying it's bad or good, but there's that distance that's created. And so really trying to work against that is really helpful. If I think I can relate to this more, like if you were going out to somebody's home, I can make a better point of it. If you're going out to somebody's home, you wouldn't want to just knock on the door, they say hello, you come in and sit down, and you immediately start asking clinical questions, or asking them to describe what's going on in their household, or anything that is deep at all. You want to just, this thing of porch time is just sit down and talk about the garden that you see, or the flowers, or the livestock, or, what if you're fortunate enough to go to someone's home, talking about the pictures you see and their family, and really trying to establish a relationship. Because pretty much I can guarantee you, and, and research has been done this way, if you don't do that, and you just jump into questions and have a very clinical relationship, you are not going to hear the full story. People aren't going to volunteer, for the most part, aren't going to volunteer the full story. They're going to hold stuff back. There's also again, with really good reason, a lot of stigma towards anything that's mental or behavioral health. A lot of just the families that are very close, and family values. There's kind of this unspoken, keep it in the family. We don't want to go spreading our business out to everybody else and telling people what's going on. So, all of these factors are why it's just really, really important to think about building trust, and just really showing genuine interest, and developing equal partnerships, and just really being respectful, which I'm sure everybody is. But I think just the more you can understand the culture, whoever it is and what group it is, whether it's Appalachia or it's New York City or wherever, is trying to understand how people are looking at the world, and what their worldview is, and what their view of sickness and disease, and, try to understand that is just so helpful. So at this point, if I've pretty much finished what I'm gonna, saying, and just curious if y'all would like to share a takeaway from what I've shared with you.
And Robyn, we do have 2 questions in the chat that I could read after people share the takeaway.
Okay.
It's understandable how people are distrustful.
Mm-hmm.
And when your family are your closest confidants, why would you trust someone in a suit coming to your door? It's very understandable. But, if you can make an inroad with one person, it'll spread through the community. So
Right.
if one person has trust with you, and you have a good relationship, it's a far-reaching effect.
That is so true. And kind of a piece of that, and I'm sure that y'all all experienced this, but so years ago, when we were, my husband and I were first married, we lived over in Hendersonville. And if I remember anything, it was everybody I came in contact with, when I said what my name was, and they just looked at me and they said, "You're not from around here, are you?" No, I'm not. But that's you will get that because people are trying to place who you are and where you're from. And, so if they don't recognize your name, then the next question may be, well, who are your people? Who are you related to? And they're doing, what you were just saying is trying to validate that you're trustworthy, and doing it because of your reputation with these other people and your reputation. There's stuff that's written about how important it is, especially if people come in from the outside and they plan on staying in an Appalachian community for a long, long time or the rest of their life, and to really get involved in the community, and which, we'll get back to what things were like before COVID hit someday, hopefully not too far off, but, to have Girl Scout, Boy Scouts, get involved in church, whatever, just different, coach Little League, different things out in the community, that the more you can do that, the more you'll develop a place because of those things, even if you don't have the family or the connection, that it's helpful. But yeah. Anybody else have something to share?
Well, I grew up in a rural area in Pennsylvania, and it was when I've been here 20 some years, but it was similar to that. I think it's just connecting when you have a lot of, family connections and everything in one area. That's what they do up there. Oh, do you know so-and-so, who you related to so-and-so? Because usually, you can find somebody that knows you or is connected to you in some way. Whereas when you're a transplant, you don't have anyone. And, but I don't know if any of you have heard of the book called, I can't remember the title of it, but it's Robert Woodson. He's an African American, and he went into the communities and asked, what can we do? How can we help? Exactly what you were saying, but these were urban communities that he did that, and he had a great deal of success. I think it's called, well, I was trying to Google it, something about For the Least of These, but that's not it. It's another book. But if you Google Robert Woodson, Woodson, I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah,
he would resonate with what you're saying, Robyn, on an urban level.
great.
That is important too, because he said, even though just because somebody's living in poverty doesn't mean they don't have good ideas, and they don't, they understand what's really needed. So
yeah, that's really true. And I think, I'll just, say this from my personal point of view, like years ago of being a nurse in a hospital, and it's really, I don't know how to say it, but it's really easy to look at people that are different or don't do what you want them to do, and get judgmental, and I can remember nurses can be the worst people in a hospital for, and then I'm sure it's better now, but
No, it's not.
no, it's probably, but it's just, as far as the Appalachian region goes, the people in this region, they're very aware, they're not oblivious to the fact that they're stereotyped and what people are thinking. And there's a participatory research study that was done out of Tennessee some 5 or 6 years ago. And I remember it really stood out with me because, like, a lot of the responses were, the question was, do you ask for clarification of whatever you've been told by your healthcare provider? Do you ask them questions? And the response, no, because we don't want to be called an uneducated hillbilly. We don't want to be looked at like we're stupid. And I think that's the thing, when you can really, get to know people in the region. They may not have finished high school, but their practical life experience, sometimes they are just, they're so smart and they know so much and they understand so much. So yeah, just the more we can ask questions and just try to get to know people better. And
what I've noticed up here are the natural engineers, people that don't have college degrees, but boy, do they know how to do something. And you look at it and you go, that is very sophisticated.
Yeah.
And, there are quite a few I've run into that are craftsmen, but they just have this understanding of weight and physics and direction of water. It's really great.
Yeah. Just by experience it and doing it.
I think
Making all the
it's-
mistakes.
I think just like we're all getting more educated about microaggressions in relation to racial differences and, ways that we can make assumptions and ways that we can make references. Like, oh my gosh, you're so articulate, as if that's sort of an amazing thing, rather than taking it for granted that people have intelligence and can speak or can do things. I think we need to be careful about that. I've lived here since 1980 and have almost all of that time have lived way out in a rural western part of the county, and where most of the people in this part of the county are multi-generational landowners. And there are just so many stories of aggression, not physical aggression, but verbal aggression on the part of either newcomers to the area or visitors to the area, that as soon as they find out somebody is from here, or somebody just has an accent and they're from, Florida or someplace, they start saying things that are terribly condescending and presumptive. And even in agencies here, that same thing will happen. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of people going to the emergency room at the hospital and being treated like a piece of garbage, with the assumption that they weren't sure they should let them come in because they might not be able to pay. And just the most recent story was somebody who is really very wealthy, but his wife had some collapse. Basically, he was coming straight from his work running an auto repair place with like thousands of dollars in cash in his pocket, and came into the ER, and they were like arguing with him about whether they would let his wife in because they weren't sure he was going to be able to pay the bill. And he just took the whole thing and threw it on the desk of this person and said, take it all. This is ridiculous. But he said it's not the first time that's happened to him, but because he came in his work clothes, he was treated as if he was a homeless person coming in off the street trying to rip off the hospital. Mm-hmm. So, that kind of stuff happens all the time in restaurants and just in stores. So we keep reinforcing that defensiveness, that protectiveness, and that sense of, I don't trust anybody if your granddaddy didn't know my granddaddy, because of that crap.
Yeah, it's very true. I know I've looked at a lot with, I started looking at probably about 4 years ago with what I'm doing, how implicit bias applies to this region. And, anyway, and I started looking at it. Well, the first thing was when I started reading that just blew me away. And I've said this so many times in presentations, and I don't know what people think, but like when I read the research that showed that we all stereotype, that it's the way our brains are wired to make sense of life and people. And, it's affected by what we've been exposed to. But I think before I read that article, I had a little bit more of an attitude or thought about, I'm a bad person if I think something, or, there's something wrong with me because I think that. And then I found that research and I was like, oh, it's normal. But that's why I'm so passionate about doing what I'm doing, because just by bringing awareness, to, and I think definitely what you were saying, and we've just, my gosh, when the racial stuff started happening, I guess this summer, for me, it was like, this is crazy. I've been talking about this implicit bias thing and stereotyping with Appalachia. And now it's like what everybody talks about all the time. And it kind of threw me for a while, going, well, are people going to think I'm just jumping on the bandwagon? And I'm not really sure how to, and I've kind of come through that and gone, well, this is really great, because it's just, we're all at such a place, or most of us are at such a place of like you said, being so much aware and thinking and trying to do better and looking and becoming educated about what we do, and yet knowing, it's hard because we're gonna, if we're in patterns of saying and doing and acting a certain way and we don't realize it's even a problem, you don't just automatically break those patterns either. But I don't know, like I've talked a lot about, because there's so much talk, and I'm sure y'all hear this a lot, the social determinants of health are so focused on. And I'm not at all saying they shouldn't be. They're very, very important, and we do need to look at them without a doubt. But in my opinion, like when we look at the Appalachian region, we've been trying to address these things for what, 40 or 50 years with really not a lot of huge change. And I look at this kind of like this is my little piece of the puzzle, but it's an important piece, because if we don't build trust with people, no matter who they are, what group they're from, no matter who they are, the outcomes are just not going to be as good as they would be if we built trust. And how do we build trust if we don't understand that there's reasons for distrust to begin with, and then we start understanding that. And I mean, I'll be glad when COVID's over and or our social distancing can get out, and just, and I would encourage y'all too. Just, I mean, everybody probably lives somewhere where there's neighbors, especially if you're out in the country, like Susie was saying, that have lived here for multiple generations, and just really try to talk to people and really try, even ask them some of these, like, well, do you remember the war on poverty, and try to see what people think and what people say. It would be, I think, very enlightening. So let's see. Let me see if I can figure out how to get back to the chat.
Yeah, we've got lots of good conversations happening on the side. Some people relating to some of the words you're talking about as being local in their perspective. And there was a question from Mackenzie from a historical perspective. She's curious how you think the eugenics movement plays a part, thinking through the idea of feeble-mindedness and forced sterilization among those that were impoverished. Thanks for your insight.
Okay, let me see if I can. I was looking to see if I could get back to it.
I could put it fresh in the chat. That's okay with
So
Mackenzie.
from a historical perspective, yeah, I mean, that's not something I've really come across or read very much about, specifically to Appalachia, is what happened in Appalachia. I know it's still, I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but I can tell y'all a story. Anyway, Transcultural Nursing Society that I'm part of, and the conference was virtual back in the fall. But one of the people were really bringing up, like in Texas and areas like that, where Hispanic people would come in to the ER or whatever, and there was still some aspect of being taken away to go be sterilized somewhere, that was going on. I can't really remember all the stories, but I mean, we were all just going, what? That's still going on? Which was just really crazy. But no, I don't, from in the area, I can't, nothing really comes to mind as far as that specifically.
Okay, I was just curious because I know that was like thinking through that history, like late 1800s, early 1900s, that people that were in poverty were specifically targeted in that way. And I was curious how that took shape in rural Appalachian counties, or when I think about like distrust of government agencies, that always is kind of in the back of my mind. So I was curious what your thoughts were on that.
No, I really haven't come across anything that specifically speaks to that in Appalachia, but it would be interesting to look it up and see for sure.
Excellent.
Wouldn't surprise me at all.
And then someone was wondering if these slides might be available in the future. Maybe they could email you directly.
The slides would be available. Is that what the question?
Yes, yes.
Yes, it will be. I think, can we post them? Is there, yeah. Yeah, I can figure out where I'm supposed to post them and post them.
Excellent, thank you. I have something to contribute. We talk about belonging, it's a sense of belonging. So sort of this dual character, and I appreciate, I think it was Janet that shared, the transient or transplant populations are now potentially the majority, right? And we as transplants, like say you meet another transplant and you say, oh, you're from around here. As the first thing they always say is, I've been here for this many years. This is my home. This is where I've grown up. And, it's sort of, we're taking on that, that building of trust, but it's in a different way. It's like, oh, I'm legitimate. I've been here for a number of years. I'm a military brat, so I do it too. So as soon as someone asks me where I'm from, I don't even say, I say I'm a military brat. And it's almost like this pass, like, oh, you poor thing. You moved too much.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like general conversations and things I've heard and read that it really doesn't matter how long you've been here for the people that are native to the region. There's a lot of discussion in Appalachian studies circles about, well, what does it take to be Appalachian? Is it, if you move, or like, what is an Appalachian fiction writer? Does the person that's writing the Appalachian fiction have to be from Appalachia and have grown up in Appalachia and, and just all of that? Or how many years do you have to live? And I had an interaction with somebody, a crazy interaction last week, and I won't name names, but it was some governmental person that her first question out of her mouth to me was, where are you from? And I said, I grew up in Durham. That's the problem. That's the problem right there. And I'm like, okay, I'm just trying to help. Whatever I was trying to do was misinterpreted, but there was no way. We've been here 15 years, which I know, it's interesting, my journey going through this. I grew up in Durham. My husband grew up in Charlotte, but then going through all the Appalachian studies stuff, we started realizing, oh, his dad was from Hazard, Kentucky. He was like deep in the heart of Appalachia, and they lived in Johnson City, Tennessee for the first 6 years of his life. But his dad died really early when my husband was 4. So that side of things never really, but it was like, oh, and then I started looking back at my family. It's like both my parents were more Southwest Virginia. So it's like genetically somehow the roots are there. And it was like, oh, okay. Well, I can kind of claim it a little bit. It's my family, but I can't really claim to, I don't think I can ever really claim to be Appalachian.
It is interesting because, and coming from where I come from, you would probably have to live generations till you were considered one of them. Mm. But it isn't necessarily a negative thing. It's just like you said, our brains are wired to kind of fit people in the schema of things. And when I go up there and you do connect with someone, say, oh yeah, I know so-and-so, your cousin did this or whatever. It's just a fun thing. It's a fun connection. So I guess it really depends on the individual if they're going to judge you for not having lived here generations or not. But I think if, like you said, if they get a chance to know you, mm-hmm. that's the key in building that trust. Mm-hmm. And they'll begin to accept you.
Mm-hmm. I also think it goes to, we're talking about historical trauma. I mean, there's some historical resilience there as well. Mm-hmm. And it comes from when you ask the question, who's your people or who are your grandparents? They had to have a vast network of people they could rely on. If you don't have money, you need to know who to go to for what and who you're going to owe and how they're going to react if you can't cash in that debt anytime soon. And so asking where you're from and who's your granddad plays a lot into that resilience.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the thing, understanding more. And like I said, the whole historical trauma piece is kind of me stepping out into something that it's not something I'm very educated on at all, but I read some of this resilience and trying to piece all that together and just understanding, like, because like family family is so important. Community is important. Faith is really important for a good majority of people. And those are all areas that can be emphasized and enhanced and used to build resilience, and understanding that. And I think the family piece is just, it goes back to settling the region and it being so mountainous. And, we'll go places like hiking wherever and I just go, how did people ever figure out how to get through this rhododendron hell to establish something? It's like, I can't understand how people did that. But, so you had people that came in and just, so extended family became so important because it was what made it the community. And, and still, like in things you'll read, for the most part, Appalachian people are thought to have like a much more emphasis on extended family and older generations, and tend to be one of the fewer population groups that want to keep their older generations at home and not put them in nursing homes. I know I was talking to a lady over in Ashe County a year or so ago, and her like 95-year-old, the person I was talking to was working full time, and her 95-year-old mom had reached the point she just couldn't be left alone. But the daughter felt so guilty because she had to put her in assisted living. It was tearing her up, but she really didn't have a choice. She couldn't stop working to take care of her mom. And so there's just a lot of tremendous dynamics that go on.
And Robyn, as a person probably in the minority in this group that has been born and raised here, I took care of my father until he died January 30th, but he was born on this land. His grandfather was born on his land. His grandfather died in the same room that my daddy died in. And then we get a letter from a real estate corporation wanting to buy our family land. I'm like, my family has worked really hard to be a successful part of this community. My maiden name is Vanoy. And when they hear Vanoy, they're like, oh, you're rich. No, we're not rich. My family has worked hard.
Yeah.
My mother was the first one of her grandparents, 81 grandchildren that ever went to college. I went to college. My brother went to college. I'm just really thankful nobody told my grandparents how poor they were. And I'm thankful that no one told my mother that she couldn't be a teacher, because she taught 31 years and had a big impact on a lot of children. But I do feel like I'm part of Appalachia, but I'm educated. My family's been, I can trace all four of my grandparents to the 1700s on this land. And then somebody sends a letter wanting to lowball and buy our family land. And that was really, and then our county commissioners come and then they try to tell us how to do things better. And so from the other perspective, it's hard, but I respect everyone on this call and respect professionals. But it's hard being a native too, on the flip side, because it's that historical trauma that my family has been through and the hard times. But like you said, community, faith, family is what has gotten us here, and the resiliency of these Appalachia people and the people. And that's why I think I cover 7 different counties, and I can go to Mitchell County, I can go to Yancey County, and I can talk the talk because I've walked the walk. And they know I care, because if they don't know that you care, they aren't going to let you help them, because the people from here are very proud.
Yeah. Teresa, I really appreciate you sharing that. That just, I'm sorry to hear about your dad, but I'm tearing up and having a hard time, but I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think that just sums it all up and says everything, you know? I mean, it's.
I know, Janet, you've been trying to say something. We're a little bit over time. Do you want to close us out?
Well, oh no, no pressure. I just wanted to add to what Teresa said about, you know, being somebody whose family's been here since the 1700s. And somebody else said something earlier about being respectful and not making judgments. So if I, as this local person who's been here since the 1700s, if I agree to not make judgments on people who move here and question their motives, then all I ask in return is that those folks don't make judgments or impressions about me because of the way I talk, or because of the fact that I lived here, you know, since that my family's been here since Moses was old or whatever. You know, that works both ways. Don't tell me that I'm articulate or that I speak well or that I can't be from here because I can put two sentences together coherently and intelligently. And I've had people tell me that. I used to think it was a compliment, and now I'm like, hell no. You know, I sound the way I do and I'm proud of it. And so just respect each other both ways. That's all I can say. Thanks for letting me vent that a little.
That was a perfect way. Sorry,
I don't
Brittany, go ahead.
read anything, but there's plenty of stuff out there about people trying to get people from Appalachia to lose their way of talking. You know, oh, you're at colleges that do it, you know, you need to talk different. Nobody's going to take you serious. And it's a really big deal. But
there's been so much shame throughout the past century on how we speak and how we live, and just pretty much hating on poor people when we have enjoyed the simplicity of our lifestyle. So just piggybacking off what Janet said, that's where cultural humility comes in place. So when you have people that are not from this area coming in, instead of coming in to try to change how we've been living, come in and help us build something. Ask us what we need, what's working and what's not. And that's where that divide comes of locals not welcoming outsiders.
Yeah. Thanks, Brittany. Well, I
Sounds
know
like
we went over and turn me loose and I won't shut up. But anyway, Jennifer, can you put the link out? There's an evaluation form I'd just like for y'all to fill out. It would help me this is quite the lifelong journey I'm going through, and just really trying to learn and grow. And
can I say something real quick to just maybe add some perspective from a native?
Sure.
I think some of the issues arise too out of natives have worked so hard for this land and to build these communities. Then we may not have the resources to be able to keep those. And so then people that are maybe more privileged come in and are then like taking some of those resources from us. And so then I think that maybe even contributes more to the historical trauma, and then creates that divide a little bit, because there's been so much hard labor in these mountain communities just simply for survival, and folks coming into the region don't know that history and don't recognize it and sometimes even appreciate it. Right. So I think that that's something to keep in mind too.
Yeah, that's really true, Tiffany. I was taking care of a hospice patient a couple of years ago, and the mom was, I don't know, she was close to 100 years old, and was this, oh my gosh, the sweetest lady. But her daughter, after her mom died, I was talking to her daughter, and I must have been doing a presentation, and I was telling her a little bit about what I was doing, and she said, oh, well, if you don't do anything else, just tell people kind of what you just said. You know, she said that we resent, it's just so hard, the people that move here from outside of the region and want the region to look like where they came from, you know. And she said, you know, they need to know what it took to get it to where it is now, and how much work and what had to be done, you know, and we don't want it changed. We want, So there's a lot of validity to that for sure. And I see Susie put in there Inside Appalachia is a radio show. And you can get it as a podcast, and it's great. Yeah, I really like listening to Inside Appalachia. But I really appreciate y'all coming today and letting me share with you. And I hope you've gotten something you can take away and help to build some a little bit different ideas or just things about how to look at the history of the region and how people interact. And I think we've had a lot of great discussion, and I wish I could like take all the people that shared that are being from here and take you with me everywhere I go. Because I have struggled with, well, what do people think when they hear me talking and they're from here? And because my intention is, it's not to change the people that are from here, it's to change the people that are coming here from other places to adjust to the people that live here. So anyway, but I really appreciate y'all, and I hope you have a very good rest of your day.